Thank you so much for joining. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for some of you. I think it's so cool that we all get to be together, no matter where we are tuning in from around the world. So thank you again for taking out the time and for tuning in just to read together, gain a little spiritual upliftment. As always, we'll start with Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Giri Varadhari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Giri Varadhari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Giri Varadhari Jai Radha Madhava Jai Radha Madhava Radhe Govinda Jaya Radhe Govinda. Srila Prabhupada famously said that this shloka, just 4 lines, contains the entire spiritual abode. All of Vrindavan is there in just 4 lines, so compact. You have Srimati Radharani, you have Krishna, you have their kunjas, you have the groves of Vrindavan, you have Giriraj, you have the Jamuna, you have Krishna's parents. So everything is there. And it's such a beautiful meditation to begin with, to take our minds away from wherever we might be. Even if we are in Vrindavan on this earth, we can take our minds to the beautiful land of Vrindavan, where we can see the places that Krishna walked. We can see, somehow get a glimpse into the pastimes that our dear Krishna had. So I will start with a few pieces from Prema Mala, and then I wanted to launch into something a little special. Something that is not in Prema Mala, but I thought would be really, really nice to read. But we'll get into that in a bit. First is a piece from Prema Mala called When. The past week, I've been feeling such a yearning to go deeper, a dissatisfaction in my own complacency. I feel that I've gotten comfortable. Anybody ever feel like you've gotten just a little bit comfortable with the way things are? Even if there is some sort of pandemic, it almost feels like, okay, we're adjusting to the new normal, we're adjusting to what life might be like now, and then we get comfortable. And if there's anything that I know about Krishna, it's that when we get that comfortable, he normally comes and shakes things up. When we get comfortable, he comes and he makes us uncomfortable. And Srila Prabhupada says that Krishna will make us uncomfortable. He will put us in situations that feel uncomfortable. They pinch, they don't feel great, but why? Why would our Krishna do this to us? He is supposed to be our most loving friend. So why? And my friend Hannah was saying, that's our Krishna. He's so kind to pull us out of our comfortability into our uncomfortability, away from our comfort zone. So why would Krishna do this? Basically, Krishna wants us all back home, more than we can ever imagine. Krishna just wants us back home. And if we stay comfortable, we will never go back home. We'll never search for more. We'll never have that yearning to go deeper. Once everything is comfortable, then we feel like, why strive? Why put in the work? Why put in the effort at all? But the minute that this world gets uncomfortable, filled with anxiety, which, let's face it, it always is filled with anxiety, then we get the idea, maybe I don't belong here after all. Maybe I should strive to get out of this place where there is nothing but fear and anxiety, even in the happy moments. I find that I'm happy, and then I wonder, am I too happy? Maybe I'm just waiting for the miseries to come. And in that way, our happiness is tinged with a little bit of anxiety. There's a saying in Hindi which roughly translates to putting salt in the sweet rice. And so it feels like this material world always finds a way to put just that little bit of salt in your sweet rice, so that you can't fully enjoy it. So Srila Prabhupada mercifully says that Krishna, out of his kindness, shakes up our lives, because then we want to go home. We want to go back home. So this piece is called When. My dearest Govinda, when I had other obligations, I said I was too busy. But I swore that when I had more time, I would dedicate it all to you. My vows knew no end, and my poetically rendered promises were perfect. When I had more time, it would be yours. When I had more time, I sat complacently and said, soon I will make my move. Soon I will make good on my promises of the past. But in a moment. After all, there's so much time now. Sitting for a moment won't hurt. What will I do when there is no more time left? What will I do when I have reached the end? Looking back on all of my decisions, fully understanding that all along I was constantly making the decision to turn away from you. I could have decided differently. That is your way, giving us the power of choice. And I choose myself. Any moment could be the last. Any moment our clock can run out, and I will be stuck with the words, if only. If only I had made good on all that I promised you. If only I had taken proper advantage of all that you had given to me. If only I had chanted your names at the top of my lungs every time I had the opportunity. This life is no gambling game, and yet, each day, I roll the dice anew. Telling myself, don't worry, you still have time. Do it later. There's so much else to be done. When will I give up this illusion of time? When will I choose you? There are so many times when I was doing one service or another, and I would look at the clock and realize, oh man, I'm running out of time. And in those moments I would pray to Krishna and say, okay, Govinda, you said in the Bhagavad Gita, you said time I am. So if you want this to work out, I'm going to need you to extend your potency of time and make this time stretch. When I choose not to use my time in the service of Krishna, it seems to go that much faster. But when I dive into pastimes of my sweet Krishna, when I talk about him, when I think about him, all of a sudden, time seems to stretch. And I can only think that this is Krishna exhibiting his own potency, thinking, just stay a little longer. Just one more moment. Just one more round. Just one more story. One more verse. One more page. One more line. Krishna will take every excuse to be with us. It's our time to take every excuse to be with him. The next piece is called Memories of Your Name. Once upon a time, everything was fine. I was going about my life like normal, and then it happened. Someone mentioned your name, and like a punch to the gut, the wind was knocked out of me, stolen by a rush of memories that assaulted me. I was caught off guard and unprepared. I had to sit, my head held between my knees, and I had to wait for the moment to pass. I counted and waited, but the moment never passed. Like a lump lodged irrevocably in my throat, the ache continued to stay with me, throbbing deep within my heart until it was impossible to ignore. I had to get up, had to keep moving, had to keep going, but would anything ever be the same again? Could my life ever return to normal without you? I feared that the answer was no. I clung to denial as though it were my only lifeline, and tried to pretend as if you didn't exist. I wanted to believe that there was only me, that I was in control. I couldn't forget you, but I didn't know how to live with you. I didn't know how to surrender all that I was for your happiness. Because if I did that, what would be left of me? If I surrendered my everything to your love, what would I be left with? I couldn't remember the way the sound of your name was like a warm caress on the coldest night of the year. I couldn't stand to remember the way it left a sweet taste in my mouth each time I uttered it. It was one thing for someone else to say your name, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. If I did, the perfectly crafted web of my own illusion would be broken, and I would know for sure who it was that I belonged to. So I continued to tell myself the greatest lie ever told. I am fine. That was the answer to every question, even when my own heart yelled at me from within to tell the truth. Just tell someone, anyone. Find someone who would understand and tell them the truth. That I absolutely was not fine, and never, ever would be again. Not without you. But then came the day that you cheated. Floating on faith's melody, you wound your way back into my life. Drums that echoed my pulse beat on again and again, lulling me into your trance. Before I even knew that the rhythm and the melody were both yours. Disguised in the voice of another, your song took over the guard dog of my mind, lulled it to sleep, and came after my heart. Before I could stop myself, before the warnings could be issued and advice heeded, I was singing. My voice loud and strong. I didn't even have a clue as to what I was singing until my mind snapped awake, jerking out of its deep slumber. It screamed at me that this was your work. The sound, the feeling, all of it. But I was already too far gone. By the time the song was over, I had given up all of it. I gave up the fight. I surrendered myself to you. The one thing I swore I would never do. And in that surrender, I found more strength than I had ever known. In giving myself to you, I found that I was more me than I ever had been. Who knew that all this time I had simply been fighting myself? In your arms, I was finally home. I could breathe, and I took deep, full drags of you as though you were my eternal life support, a plug that I could never pull. Your name was my link to my very being. I was fine. I had been going along just the same way I always had. Until one day, someone mentioned your name. And before I knew it, that someone was me. And everything changed. Nothing would ever be the same. Once your name was spoken, it could not be forgotten. Once your name found its way in, it would conquer my heart. It would breach the high-walled fortress, swim across the moat of forgetfulness, trek through the desert of my own cynicism, pass through the jungle of my jaded misgivings, and climb to the topless tower of my ego. Once that tower fell, you would come for me, and I would want you to. Rescue me from myself. Once I speak your name, that's when the battle begins. Defeat the dragon of doubt. Be my knight in shining armor, because once I speak your name, I am yours. All glories to the holy name of our Sri Krishna. Sachinandan Swami makes a really valid point and an important observation that the holy name is our first best friend. Before Krishna can come and take his rightful place upon the throne of our hearts, the area has to be cleaned. It's been out of use for so long that it has to be cleaned. And sometimes we can't even clean it on our own. But the holy name, the form of Sri Nam Prabhu himself, once we begin chanting, the holy name will take the humble position of a street sweeper and will sweep our hearts. The holy name himself will clean our hearts. And after that has happened, then then the deity of our Krishna can be installed upon the throne of our heart. All glories to our first best friend, our true well-wisher, beautiful Srinam Prabhu, who will do anything for us. Even when we are not strong enough to call out ourselves, he'll do the work. So, next I wanted to share something really special. Something that I had shared on Facebook in writing, but I wanted to read it. I know a lot of people on Instagram had never heard this, because I don't think I posted it on Instagram. It was too long. And this is a short piece adapted from the Mahabharata. So to bring everyone up to speed on this particular piece, the Mahabharata is one of two great epics of India, Sri Ramayana being the other. And the Mahabharata tells of the story, and I know so many of us have been binge watching Mahabharata since lockdown began. I know myself, I've been binge watching 2 different versions. And Mahabharata tells the story of the Pandavas, the illustrious sons of Queen Kunti, who is none other than the aunt of our hero Sri Krishna. So the Pandavas are the cousins of Krishna. And through calamities and tragedies when they were younger, their father Pandu died. So their mother Kunti raised them all on her own. And in raising them, she goes back to the kingdom of Hastinapur. And she seeks help from King Dhritarashtra, who is Pandu's brother, so Kunti's brother-in-law. And Dhritarashtra and his wife Gandhari, Dhritarashtra is blind. And along with his wife Gandhari, they have 100 sons and a daughter. And these 100 sons are led by the eldest, whose name is Duryodhana. If anybody knows the story, Duryodhana is our villain. He is the bad guy. So, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, who are the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas came to be known as such because they were descendants of Kuru. The Pandavas were also descendants of Kuru. However, Duryodhana and his brothers decided that they needed a different name. They didn't want to be in the same class as these Pandavas. So the Pandavas and the Kauravas did not get along. And there was a lot that went on between them. From their very childhood, Duryodhana tried in various ways to kill the Pandavas. So even as young boys, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, Duryodhana tried to kill the Pandavas, which is a little intense for a youngster. And as he got older, it only got worse. And he was encouraged by Gandhari's brother Shakuni. So he was encouraged by his uncle to plot and scheme against these 5 boys. As they got older, the Pandavas and their mother Kunti just kind of wanted to live in peace. They saw no reason to continue the fighting and the scheming, and it's a little tiring. And so eventually, the Kauravas, headed by Duryodhana, say, there is a wonderful celebration being held in the town of Varnavat. Why don't you go there? Spend some time there, have a little vacation. It'll be great. We've built you a palace even. It'll be wonderful. However, the palace was made of completely flammable material. The Pandavas get there, they enjoy the celebration, and then Duryodhana arranges to have the entire palace burnt to the ground. This is first-degree arson. Luckily, the Pandavas and their mother escape. Eventually, the Pandavas happen to marry the most beautiful woman on earth at the time. Her name was Draupadi. She was the daughter of King Draupadi. And she was born from a great fire yajna, a fire sacrifice. So she's quite fiery tempered. She has quite a passionate nature. But she's also quite celestial. So the Pandavas, who are 5 brothers, yes, all 5 of them, happen to marry Draupadi. And it's a long story, but the eldest of the Pandavas, Yudhishthira, is crowned king. He should have been king of Hastinapur. He was the eldest, but Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana and everyone schemed against him, and they finally gave him a section of the kingdom called Khandava. Khandava Prast. The only problem with this section of the kingdom was that it was completely barren. It was a barren wasteland. One would think, who does this? What kind of family does this? What kind of government does this? Because really, this is political as well as a family matter. Who would do this kind of thing? So if we look at our modern day issues, they don't seem so modern day. Governments scheming against each other, people being unfair to one another, injustice is happening left and right, and civilians caught in the crossfire. This happens even when Krishna was on the planet 5,000 years ago, in a previous yuga. So Yudhishthira is given this Khandava Prast. But the Pandavas always have Krishna on their side. And because they have Krishna on their side, Krishna comes and he helps them. And with his advice, they turn this barren wasteland into the most beautiful kingdom on earth. So when Krishna arranges your life, there is no one who could arrange it better. There are no plans that we could have that could equal to the plans that Krishna has for our lives. They have a magical palace filled with wonders and illusions and anything that the mind could think of. They have rugs that look like fire. They have curtains that look like waterfalls. They have all kinds of wonderful, magical things inside this dreamland of a palace. So when we think about the things that we want in our lives, we have to know that no one can arrange it better than Krishna. And we should always want him on our side. Naturally, Duryodhana and the Kauravas were furious. How is it possible that these Pandavas just keep winning at life? So they devised a plan. They challenged Yudhishthira to a dice match. It is said that Kshatriyas or warriors could never back down from a fight or a challenge at dice. Dice is a game wherein which things are gambled, and then you roll the dice, and you move around a board, and whoever wins, winner takes all. During that dice match, the Pandavas are cheated out of their entire kingdom. Eventually, they are cheated out of their very livelihoods. Yudhishthira begins to wager his own brothers, and finally, himself. I was talking to my 6-year-old nephew today, Srinam, and he was trying to tell me the story of Govardhan Puja. And as he was telling me the story, every few seconds he would stop and say, "But Auntie Acyuta, why would this happen? How would this happen? How could this be? Krishna's God, everybody knows it. How are these demigods doing these things? And I would say, Srina, when we get angry, when things are taken away from us, we lose our intelligence. You can even see, if you get in trouble and your mom takes things away, we start to do things we'd never do. Even when we're tired, we start to do things we just wouldn't normally do. So how is it that Yudhishthir, who is the emblem of righteousness, his very name means that he's steady and patient within battle. He is the son of Dharma. So he's the embodiment of all religiosity and righteousness. How is it that such a personality would begin to gamble away his family? It's easy to see how we lose track of our very selves. The emotions take over us, and before we know it, we're acting in ways that we'd never act before. So Yudhishthir gambles away his brothers, himself, and then his wife, Draupadi. The Kauravas then decide that, well, Draupadi is ours now. She is a maid, and the rest of you are slaves. And so they forcibly drag Draupadi into the assembly by her hair. And they commit one of the greatest injustices that this earth has ever seen. They proceed to disrobe her in front of an entire assembly of her elders, in front of everyone who should have been able to protect her. Draupadi, of course, is furious. How can you all allow this to happen? You all speak of righteousness. You all speak of religiosity. How is it that one woman can be dragged in front of this court? I'm supposed to be the jewel of the family, the Lakshmi of the home, and how is it that now I've been forcibly dragged here to be treated despicably? This behavior is disgusting, and none of you will say anything. You are elders. You're teachers. Shame on you. And unfortunately, no one is able to stop Duryodhana. He has lost control. His father's lost control of him. His uncle Vidura finally stands up, who is the prime minister. He says, this has gone on long enough. Somebody should stop this, or this will bring about the ruination of this entire dynasty. This could bring about the end of the world as we know it. This is terrible. Someone should stop this. And they tell Vidura, who are you? Sit down. Say nothing. And as far as I know, Vidura is the only one who leaves. He refuses to stay and watch this injustice happen. So they drag Draupadi, and Dushashan, the younger brother of Duryodhana, begins to disrobe her by force. And as we know, Draupadi struggles. She tries to hold on with both fists, but Dushashan is battle-hardened. He's a warrior who does push-ups every day. He works out. That's all he does. And she can't fight him. She loses grip with one hand, she holds on with another. She loses grip with both hands, she holds on with her teeth. She loses her grip with her teeth, and all she can think is, this is it. My life as I know it is over. I can't recover from this. And I don't know who can save me from this. I am married to the strongest warriors in the world, and they can do nothing. I know of only one person who can help. And with everything she has, she begins to call out to Govinda, her friend. And she calls out to him. And she describes that, please, save me. Do something. I am about to be dishonored in this court of the Kurus. You must. You have to do something. And all of a sudden, everything begins to change. She throws her arms up in the air. She surrenders everything. And Krishna sends an unending supply of cloth to cover his dearest friend. He sends an unending supply of cloth to cover her. And as Dushashan pulls and pulls and pulls, now there's a mountain of cloth gathering up next to him until finally he's exhausted. And he faints. And everyone is astonished. No one can figure out what miracle has just happened. And Draupadi, her entire idea of who she was, everything that she knew is shattered. But she knows that Krishna came and saved her, invisible though he was. And Gandhari, the mother of Duryodhana, arrives on the scene and pleads with her. I can't believe my son has done this. I can't believe this. But please, just don't curse him. I know if you curse him, everything will be ruined right this very moment. You have the power. Please don't curse him. And in a move of infinite compassion, Draupadi does not curse them all. What amazing character and integrity and strength of heart that has to take. Not to curse the people who have so disgustingly offended you. They've abused her. She was dragged by her hair. She's bruised. Her pride, everything about her is broken. She doesn't curse them. She asks for her husband's kingdom back. She asks for their wealth back, their land back, and their own lives back. However, in another twist of fate, yet another gambling match is wagered. They challenge them to yet another gambling match. And once again, they lose everything. But this time, they stop before wagering themselves. And so the Kauravas, they say, fine, we will be satisfied with this. The wager is, if we win, you have everything back, no problem. But if you lose, you have to go into exile for 12 years. But there has to be a 13th year where you go into exile in disguise. A year of anonymity. If you are found out during this last year, if we're able to find you and able to recognize you, you have to start the entire process again. And you'll go back into exile for 12 years. The wager is accepted by the Pandavas, and they lose. So the Pandavas have to go into exile for 13 years. During the course of this exile, Duryodhana tries various tactics to ruin their lives. It seems like it's his hobby. So he tries in various ways to ruin their lives. One of the ways he tries to ruin their lives is he sends the great sage Durvasa Muni to see them. Durvasa Muni is famous for his power, but he is also very famous because he is quickly angered. And when he is angry, he also curses very intensely. So he gets angry quickly, and then he curses you quickly. So Duryodhana thinks, if I send Durvasa Muni to the Pandavas, they're bound to do something that's going to make him angry. And if he gets angry, he'll curse them, and then their lives will be ruined, and then I'll be happy. So with that thought in mind, Duryodhana joyfully sends Durvasa Muni to go visit the Pandavas in their forest dwelling while they are in exile. And that is the section that I would like to read today. So I adapted this from the Mahabharata. All eyes were on her, and suddenly she was having trouble breathing. She was an empress, the undisputed sovereign queen of the whole world. And she was afraid of guests. A few guests. How was this happening? Draupadi, Panchali, Yagyaseni, the great fire-born daughter of the heroic King Draupadi, was afraid of hosting guests. Durvasa Muni, the great ascetic, had shown up unannounced with his 10,000 followers and declared that they were all very hungry. He requested that a meal be ready upon his return from his bath at the river. He then turned on his heel and strode away, great streams of power rippling off of him, almost tangible enough to feel. A request from Durvasa Muni was a demand. There was no way around it. He was famous for his temper and for testing those who attempted to serve him. If they passed his tests, fortune was often on their side. But if they failed, they faced his wrath and the consequences were dire. But now, Durvasa Muni had come, and everyone was looking at her. Draupadi sucked in a labored breath, feeling as though she were trying to breathe underwater. They had been living in the forest for years, exiled from their prosperous empire. Food had never been a problem before. Even the voracious eater Vrikrodar never complained about the amount of food. She had received a sacred vessel from Suryadev, which would produce as much food as they could ever need in one day. Until, of course, she herself ate. Then its magic would be done for the day, only to start up again the next. It was nightfall, and the Pandavas and Draupadi had already taken their evening meal. Her vessel was useless. Her hands shook, and as a weight settled firmly on her chest, she realized this was a disaster. The sons of Dhritarashtra had tried every tactic they could think of in order to destroy the Pandavas, but Draupadi was afraid that although they had survived several attempts on their lives, there was no surviving the curse of this one sage. Her husbands looked to her. What else could they do? What else could she do? Tearing around their humble abode was useless. She knew what she would find. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She hadn't felt this powerless since she had been dragged through the court of the Kurus and had immediately called out to Govinda. Her outburst shocked her husbands, to be sure, but she couldn't help herself. A nervous jitter had her pacing and wringing her hands. We are drowning again. How can we escape our fate without you? What will become of us? What do we do? Govinda, Govinda. She was very much aware that she was mumbling to herself now. But she knew her friend always had the best ideas. And if she could somehow just try to think of what he would do, then maybe they could. Sandalwood. Her senses were assailed by the unmistakable scent of sandalwood. Sandalwood, and you were calling me? A deep voice, with just a hint of a smile, was just behind her. But it couldn't be. It was impossible. Draupadi shut her eyes tight and spun around. She didn't want to open them just to be disappointed, but she would know that voice anywhere. She peeked, opened just one eye, just a tiny bit, and there, standing in the middle of their hut, where he definitely had not been before, was Krishna. There was a collective murmuring from everyone involved. Arjuna hugged his friend. Yudhishthir breathed a sigh of relief. Nakul and Sahadev rushed to pay their respects. Bhima chuckled at his uncanny timing, and Draupadi's eyes filled with sweet tears of relief. After a moment of commotion, Govinda placed his hands on his hips and faced her squarely. "What seems to be the problem, my dear?" Draupadi quickly relayed the events of the past few moments and tried to convey the incredible sense of urgency she felt. Krishna stroked his chin deep in thought as he listened. "This is indeed a grave problem. But I can't solve these kinds of problems on an empty stomach. The sage is hungry, but so am I. Feed me first. You're my friend, after all." Govinda was gazing at her, his two eyes going large and a pout tugging at his entire face. In that moment, she understood how entire villages and cities did whatever it was he wished, but even she couldn't do the impossible. "That's just the thing. We have no food, Krishna. None at all." She must have sounded hysterical, but she hardly cared. She thought he would understand, but his frown and its resulting pout only deepened. "Saki, this is no time for jokes. I'm so hungry. I can barely think. You must have something. Bring me that mystical vessel from Surya. I want to see for myself." Draupadi wanted to argue, but there was a strange gleam in his eye, so she did as he asked. He took the copper vessel in his hands, the copper reflecting hues of dark blue and red as he peered across the surface of the clearly empty... There! Krishna sounded so pleased with himself, but everyone around him snapped to attention. "Where?" The response was unanimous. Krishna lifted his finger, and on it there was what looked to be a pitiful speck of rice and vegetable. It looked more like evidence of a bad cleaning job than anything that someone would eat, let alone Krishna. Draupadi took a step forward to stop her stubborn friend, but before she could utter a single word, "May the Lord of Sacrifice be pleased with this offering," Krishna stuck his finger into his mouth, and the morsel was gone, along with all of Draupadi's warnings. Krishna made an exaggerated show of chewing, humming all the while as though it were the best meal he had ever had. When he was finished, and Draupadi was sure she would faint from holding her breath so long, he sat back and sighed with satisfaction, his eyes slightly heavy from his full belly. Krishna looked languidly over at Bhima. "Brother, would you kindly tell the rishis that their meal is ready?" Krishna's smile left no room for argument. Trusting him absolutely, Bhima left immediately to go and speak with the sages. Time never moved so slowly as it did in those moments while the Pandavas and Draupadi waited for Bhima to return with the sages. When his hulking frame filled the doorway again, Draupadi gasped, awaiting something terrible. But nothing happened. Nothing at all. "Well?" Yudhishthir urged his brother. "They were gone. I couldn't find them anywhere." Bhima looked as confounded as they all felt. All heads whipped back to where Krishna sat, still looking content, his hand resting on his stomach. "What if they return? Durvasa Muni might..." Yudhishthir was saying. They won't return." Krishna's voice cut through all arguments. They waited for a long moment while Govinda roused himself from his post-meal haze of contentment. "Understanding my dearest's very grave dilemma, I came as quickly as I was called, and fixed it. They won't dare return." Krishna smiled and shrugged as though the solution was as easy as a snap of his fingers. Draupadi sighed and smiled. Yudhishthir folded his palms before him, his respect for Krishna overwhelming. Bhima began to laugh. the sound of relief bellowing out and filling up their humble home, while Krishna smiled and looked over each of them for a long while. Finally, he spoke. Now that you are sufficiently out of danger and can rest at ease, with your permission, I will return to Dwarka. At the word rest, it seemed that Krishna was also reminded of how late it was, and he gave a great yawn that had Draupadi looking on in awe again. How did he do it? One moment he was their savior, the next, their mischievous friend. She knew she would never understand him. She stopped trying, and instead reveled in the unique feeling that overcame her every time they were visited by their friend. Krishna does handle everything so easily. When Krishna was pleased by the one speck of rice and vegetables, suddenly Durvasa Muni, who was in the river bathing, and all of his 10,000 disciples were also simultaneously pleased. Some of them began to belch while they were in the water. Some of them felt such a full feeling they couldn't think of even possibly eating anything. And understanding that Yudhisthira was so righteous, they thought, we have called this king to give us a meal, and now if we don't eat, we will have offended him. And if we offend him, there's no telling what he'll do. And that brother of his, Bhima, is also very short-tempered, which is why Krishna sent Bhima to go check on the sages. And when they realized that they wouldn't be able to stomach anything else, they all fled, running away quickly. So Krishna saved the day. The meditation at the end of this is, O Govinda, my love is insignificant, barely there, and often lost in the dark. But if anyone can find just a speck of my love and turn it into everything and more, it's you. I know it. So in the dark, in the hard times, through every millennium or birth or planetary system, please come find me. Come get me. Make sense out of my existence by linking me with you. No matter what, come find me, and no matter where I go, no matter what I do, let me always see you. So like Krishna finding that one speck of food in this empty vessel, which is mystical, I know that my best friend can find this speck of my love that might be barely there. It might be nothing in comparison to others. Ultimately, what can I offer to the Lord who already has everything? But I know He will find it. He will find that one speck. And out of His own causeless mercy, I pray that He is pleased with that speck of love. If He's pleased, this entire creation will be pleased. Thank you so much for joining me. Over the last few days, I've seen that altogether there are about 800-900 people that wind up viewing these at a time when they're live. So thank you. That is huge for me. It's tremendous that so many of you would want to sit and just have association. That's a miracle. That is a message of love from my dear Govinda. It keeps me going and it keeps me motivated. So I thank you all so much, and I pray for your good wishes and your blessings and your prayers that somehow I can continue with these live readings, and that we can always have each other's association. With that said, I will be back again tomorrow. and we can share more stories. I think maybe tomorrow will be the story of Kubja, which is one of my favorites. So, if you've read the story of Kubja, I can't wait to see your reactions and to share it with you. If you haven't, it'll be wonderful. I know I made a recording of Kubja's story, but I can't help but want to read it again anyway. So I'll be reading about Kubja tomorrow, and we can all see how Krishna can transform our lives. No matter what we think, no matter what we think we have or don't have, no matter what is within our possession, no matter how we look, Govinda can change our lives. Just like Draupadi, she knew that the only thing she could do in order to solve any of her problems was to just call out to her friend. Thank you so much for calling out to our friend with me. I will see you all again next time. Hare Krishna.